Hello, everyone. This is Dan Wisenhunt, editor and publisher of Decatorish.com. It is June 12th, and you are watching the Decatorish.com Twitch show. Our guests for today are Avondale Estates City Manager Patrick Bryant. Hello, Patrick. How are you?
I'm great, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Great, great. Thanks for joining us. George Welborn with a group called Tucker Open Door, which is pursuing a non discrimination ordinance in Tucker. George, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Thank you for joining us. And our regular guest, Hans Utz, who's a contributor to Decatorish. Hans, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
And we're also going to eventually be joined, I think, by George Cheedy. George is a busy man, so he might be joining us late. But I wanted to let everyone know that if you want to ask us some questions, best way to do that is to go ahead and create a Twitch account. You can do that via the Twitch website, and you can ask questions. And if you're going to do that, go ahead and give us a follow. We're up to 130 some odd follows right now, which is great. We're very glad that we have people joining in. And just to start our show off, we had breaking news. That's why I sent the Zoom link out really late, because I was running to get this news posted, and Judge Clarence Siegler, ordered the county to remove the Confederate monument in the square on the basis that it is a public nuisance. And Decatorish on June 3rd had published an editorial advocating for the monument's removal. We asked that the city engage its smart attorney, who is named Brian Downs, to figure out a legal argument or craft a legal theory to remove the monument. I don't know that they did that because of what I wrote, but I'm glad we are on the record anyway. And Brian did that. And, Brian and I don't always agree on a lot of stuff, but that man is a smart attorney. And he definitely figured out a way to get a judge to jump in and rule on their behalf. So good on the city. I'll give a round of applause to the city of Decatur and its officials for getting that done. The city, they have until, I believe, June 26th at midnight to remove it. I'll have to double check the date, but it's later this month, so they have until midnight to remove it. So hopefully that'll get done. There's probably going to be a lawsuit in the middle of it, so we'll follow that as well. So on today's show, we're going to start with a discussion with George Welborn, who has been pursuing a non-discrimination ordinance in the city of Tucker. Now, George, if you would, tell us what is a non-discrimination ordinance and why do you feel that Tucker needs one?
Okay, so a non-discrimination ordinance sort of lays out some rules of society that says, if you're going to do business here, you're going to serve everyone. And it provides a way, if there is an instance where, for example, someone goes to shop and they don't want to bake your cake because they don't like gay people getting married, you have a way then, an organized way to deal with that. So in terms of why Tucker needs it, that was one of the first questions that I was asked by one of my city council people. Have you personally had an experience with this? And I can say that, I've lived here 23 years and I can't think of any single incidents where anyone has treated me in a way that I felt was discriminatory. But I've been on this planet enough years that I know that this stuff happens. And right now, if it happens, well, there's no way to record it. There's no way to deal with it. So a non-discrimination ordinance provides an orderly way to deal with it when it does happen. I think that, Tucker's a great place and probably would be very few, if any, cases that actually happen. But you never know who's going to move here next week and set up shop. And when it does happen, we need a way to take care of it in an orderly fashion. And I would, the worst case is that someone does something to the wrong person and they get pissed off and they go to Channel 11 and then, someone sticks a microphone in front of the mayor and says, "What are you going to do about it?" And the mayor says, "Nothing I can do about it." We want to make sure there is something that can be done about it. And we want to know if it's happening, we want to have a way to find that information out. So that this non-discrimination ordinance will help us do those things. And, another thing is that right now with our neighbor cities, Atlanta and Chamblee and Doraville and Clarkston all having adopted them, it can put us at a disadvantage as a city to not have it. Imagine if we find ourselves competing with, say, Chamblee for a new business to come here. The non-discrimination ordinance might be the thing that they're looking for. Maybe they want to have an environment where all their employees feel safe before they move there. So there's just so many reasons why we need to do it.
So I'll stop that for 1 second because I want to welcome George Cheedy, who just jumped in. George, how are you?
I'm good. Sorry about the technical difficulties.
Well, that's okay. I'm glad you can make it. You doing okay?
I'm fine. Nobody's shooting at me. I won't complain.
Not getting tear gas? That's good.
Not today, but this time.
So George Welborn, I'm gonna have to use
The George and the George.
two Georges today.
Hello, George.
Was just explaining to us about Tucker Open Door, which is a citizens group that's been pushing for a non-discrimination ordinance in Tucker. George Welborn, how long have you been asking Tucker to do this? Because I know this is not new. This has been going on for some time.
Yeah, we started this effort right about this time last year. I was actually at a potluck dinner, and a fellow came up to me and said, I've been in contact with the mayor trying to get proposing a non-discrimination ordinance, and I'm just not getting anywhere with it. And I thought, well, that's actually an important thing, and I shouldn't just leave it to this guy to do by himself. So I called a couple of friends. I spoke to my city councilwoman, Ann Lerner. She was on board right from the start. And we just started meeting and figuring out, how do we make this happen in Tucker? And Ann suggested that we actually submit a draft ordinance to the city so they would have something to work from. So that we sent that ordinance. I was looking at that date on that ordinance draft is July 11th. So it's, they've had it in their hands for almost a year now.
And what is their response when you ask them why they haven't acted on it?
Well, that's a tough one because, there were concerns about what if someone wanted to file a frivolous claim against a business and cause trouble by using this ordinance. And our response is, if someone's got a beef with a business, they can go online and cause all kinds of trouble. But this ordinance at least gives a way to handle it in an orderly fashion, and gives a way, if it's a frivolous claim, a business to defend themselves. I think there was a feeling that it's not needed. I think that some of the people on the council don't understand why it's necessary. I think that, to my knowledge, this is the first kind of citizen proposed initiative for the city of Tucker. I mean, Tucker's only been incorporated since 2016. I think this is the first time that a citizen has come to you and then said, we want something to happen. I think every other ordinance the city's passed has either been something that one of them initiated, or the staff or the city attorney has said, you got to have this done. So I think there might be some wariness about it coming from citizens instead of, from one of them or from one of their trusted sources. And I think that some of them have expressed a kind of a live and let live philosophy of, not interfering with people. But my feeling is that the let live part of that doesn't always seem to extend to certain people. So if you are gay or transgendered or black or foreign, that let live may not always get to you. So that's why I think that it's important to kind of enforce that live and let live with a non-discrimination ordinance.
Patrick Bryant.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, if I could, I'd love to use this platform to speak to some of the legislators in Tucker about this, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that ordinance is fundamentally an insurance policy. You cannot go to a single community that has experienced the kind of disruption that comes along with a crisis because of an obstinate business or because of some form of discrimination that has happened in the community. You can't point to a single one of them that says, hey, we would do it again that way if we had that choice. It's extremely disruptive. It's costly to the city or the municipality where that happens. And it absolutely wrecks reputations in a way that it's very, very difficult for any municipality to recover from. And so this ordinance is an insurance policy so that you don't end up on the wrong side of that conversation. This isn't about where you are right now. And I generally, agree Tucker is a pretty, laissez-faire place. I don't suspect it's a huge risk that it's going to happen tomorrow, but if it does, the wreckage of Tucker's reputation, it just, why on earth would you not want to take out that insurance policy to make sure that you're not in that conversation and that your name, the name Tucker, Georgia, doesn't pop to the top of every list when people Google, unfriendly cities to live? Like, why would you choose that? And so by not taking action, you are, in fact, choosing that. It's frustrating.
In fairness to the city of Tucker, Hans, I mean, Decatur was not the first city to do a non-discrimination ordinance either. I think they were the fourth or fifth. There is some argument to giving it thought and consideration. But
a year is a delay. That's not thought and consideration.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's not a delay, but I'm just saying that, it has taken cities longer than some people would have liked. But I think what's interesting in Tucker is, I emailed Mayor Frank Allman right before the last Tucker City Council meeting, and I said, will you commit to a non-discrimination ordinance? Period. Straight up question. He wouldn't answer me. He won't commit publicly to it. And I find that, even Decatur, when they didn't have an ordinance, they were like, yeah, we want to do this. We just want to make sure that we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's here. But Tucker has got some kind of strange aversion to doing this ordinance, and I can't figure out why. I can't figure out where it's coming from. George Welborn, maybe you can speak to that, but I'm not sure where it's coming from.
I keep coming across this sort of not understanding of why it's important. But then, Monday night at the city council meeting, you heard several of them make speeches about the hate crimes resolution they passed that made me think they're getting it finally, at least. So I think they understand the concepts now. I completely agree with Hans. This is an important insurance policy. I think there's been some resistance to passing a law against something that they don't see as being a problem yet. But at the same time, they understand the concept of passing a law preemptively. For example, with the scooters, Tucker outlawed electrical scooters back in 2019. Now, I can promise you as a citizen of Tucker that we were not tripping over piles of scooters in the sidewalks. They were not an issue here, but they had seen that it was an issue in other places, and they got out in front of it and dealt with it in their own way. So they understand that concept. So why they haven't dealt with it exactly is a bit of a mystery to me. I mean, not even really wanting to talk about it. I think some of them are scared that there are conservative elements in the city that will blow back on them. But my feeling is that Tucker may not be quite as conservative as they think. And after 2018, I voted in the Tucker precinct. And after the governor election in 2018, I went back and checked how my precinct voted. And we went for Stacey Abrams in my Tucker precinct. So
We do too.
George, so George wants to jump in. First of all, George actually broke his arm riding one of these scooters a year, 2 years ago.
Right here.
And
Like where the plate is.
when I first heard about it, I was like, yeah, that sounds like something George would do. It was the least shocking news I had heard. I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. George, what do you think about all this?
I have a lot to say about non-discrimination stuff. Let's start with this. What I strongly suspect is that small businesses in Tucker have been whispering in the ears of Tucker legislators saying, please God, don't do this. Only they're whispering. They're not saying it out loud because nobody wants to be responsible for killing a non-discrimination ordinance. They just don't want it to be there. Like nobody's going to stand up in public and say, yeah, this thing, like we need to not be bound by this. Nobody's going to say that out loud, but I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. And here's why. An African-American with a good resume and a clean criminal record is less likely to be called in for a job interview than a white person with the identical resume and a recent felony conviction. This has been consistent through all of the testing, the blind resume testing that has been done for the last 30 years. It has not diminished at all. There are strong federal laws around anti-discrimination, particularly if you're a federal contractor. But the only way you trip those laws typically is because somebody does a statistical analysis of a relatively large business, and they find that you blew off all of your, say, Asian applicants. And that's actually the most common. It's more common for people of Asian descent to have a cause of action at the federal level than a black person. Partly because of the way people apply. But if there's a local law, and you're not talking about employers with 500 employees where you can do a statistical regression analysis where you can look at the standard deviations of difference. We're talking about 2 or 3 or 4 people who bring a cause of action. Suddenly those small businesses or even the medium-sized businesses become vulnerable and have to actually start spending money on human resources so that they don't end up in court. And it's money they don't want to spend because people by and large want to be able to hire whoever the hell they want without having to worry about whether or not they advertised it correctly or whether or not they turned down one too many African-American applicants. It's a local cause of action. And yeah, no small business is going to say, yeah, I know that we, our entire staff is white, and I know that's a problem, but by God, please don't let me have to go to court over it. They'll kill it if they can.
Patrick, we haven't had a chance for you to weigh in. Does Avondale Estates have a non-discrimination ordinance, or have you ever talked about passing one?
We don't currently have one on the books. We have had discussions about introducing an ordinance. I imagine that introduction will happen in the next coming months. I can't speak to, how the board would decide to vote and what language would be used, so on and so forth. But I do know that there has been interest amongst board members in introducing such an ordinance for our city. And I would expect something to be done in the next coming months along those lines.
So if you're just joining us, this is the Decatur-ish.com Twitch show. We have as our guests Avondale Estates City Manager Patrick Bryant, George Welburn with Tucker Open Door, which is a group that's promoting a non-discrimination ordinance in the city of Tucker. And we have our columnists Hans Utz and George Cheedy. And let's jump to some reader comments really quickly. ATL Writer, I think referring to the Decatur's removal of the monument, said genius use of the law. Said that's a ludicrous excuse. I think that had to do with your comment regarding the non-discrimination ordinance. ATL Writer must live in Tucker because they asked, what about when the city council says things are the Tucker way? What is the Tucker way? Is there a Tucker way? George Welburn?
Atlanta way with more barbecue.
Okay.
My interpretation of the Tucker way, I've only lived here 23 years, so I don't know everything about Tucker, right? But I think, Tucker is a little bit more laid back and unpretentious. That's one of the things I like about Tucker. It just looks like a little humble railroad town. So the Tucker way is to, I think, to be kind of non-confrontational and easygoing. That's kind of the way I see that.
And I mean, but that is that makes you particularly vulnerable to the kind of outrage that can be engendered when you end up in a situation where there is discrimination and there's like a national story about it, right? I mean, that's the whole point of having an ordinance in place, is to protect you being able to continue to have that way, the Tucker way, even if something would happen.
So at the meeting the other night, Frank Allman gave a lengthy speech I will say he said a lot of words about discrimination, and it was before. It was kind of a little different. Normally, he speaks at the end of meetings. He spoke at the beginning, and at one point, he talked about Black Lives Matter, and he said something to the effect of, "I'm a living example that you can believe that Black Lives Matter without supporting the Black Lives Matter movement." And of course, the full text of his remarks are on Decaters.com. George Welborn, what was your reaction to what? I assume you were at that meeting. What was
Yeah,
your
I was
reaction?
there.
So, give us the scene. Like, tell us how this started, and because I understand that Frank Allman spoke for quite a while at that meeting.
He did, and actually, if you go to the city's website, they have a recap of the city
Yes.
meeting, and there's a video of that speech you can watch. And I honestly have not been going to city council meetings since the pandemic started because I didn't want to be in a room full of, just didn't think it was a good idea to be in a room full of people. But I'd gotten wind that this, hate crimes resolution was possibly going to happen. I wanted to be there and witness that. So, the mayor's speech, there were times when I wasn't sure where he was headed with it. But the takeaway for me is that at the end of it, he got to the right place. And, we all take our own routes to get where we got to go. And some of us might have a more direct route or a more elegant route, but he got there. So that's what I'm choosing to concentrate on, is that in the end, they did the right thing. Whether you agreed with the way he said everything, you can make your own conclusions from that.
Hans, I saw you make a face. Did you want to weigh in on that?
I mean, George, you're being very generous, right? Like, I look.
Well, look, I want to be able to still have conversations with these people.
I appreciate that. I can appreciate that. I suffer under no such constraints. Look, man, you can't be supportive of Black Lives Matter as long as they're calm about things. You can't be supportive about the outrages that we're seeing happening around the country as long as people are nice to each other. Like, there's genuine anger, and it's legit genuine anger. You don't get to discriminate between the calm people that I like and the pissed off people in the street that are outraged. And so if you're drawing that distinction, you're automatically in a bad place about it. And it's tough for me to see what kind of path he can walk through to arrive at the right place at the end of that if your starting point is Black Lives Matter as long as they're calm. Like, I'm not super good with that.
I don't think I'm being out of line when I say that, he started out saying, expressing he had some discomfort and that there was some difficulty that he had and he had to work on it.
That's true. He did.
So he had to start at somewhere and get to another place. And so, he may not be at 100% where you would like for him to be, but in the end, he did the right thing. So that's what I'm sticking with.
If there is one thing I've learned within the last few weeks, it is that black people are tired of white people giving speeches about racism and looking for absolution and quoting MLK. They are generally just tired of it. And so when I think poor Frank is like 2 weeks behind on that memo because I was watching that speech and I was like, oh my God. This isn't, no.
There we go again.
This ain't going to go well for him, unfortunately. But I want to pivot a little bit because I want to make sure I'm getting Patrick in this discussion. Patrick, the city of Avondale Estates, as I understand it, is going to be having a discussion around policing and police policies. The city of Decatur recently got some questions about how it. Yes, Patrick, why don't you tell us where that's going?
So, as a result of the movement momentum over the past month, I think the board has had an increased number of people contacting it about race relations within the city of Avondale throughout its history into the present, actions of our police department, the policies and procedures of our police department, policies and procedures for other municipal services, so on and so forth. So the board felt it, absolutely necessary to engage with our residents in a conversation about these things. So they released a statement, I think a little over a week ago now, letting our residents know that this was a topic that was of incredible importance to them, and one that they wanted to make sure was adequately addressed in a public forum, and therefore went ahead with announcing a discussion of these various topics at our work session on the 17th.
Hey, Patrick, if I could ask, what percent of the Avondale general fund is the police department? Do you know offhand?
Yeah, it's roughly 25-30%. It is, our
and then the capital funds, are there any capital funds for equipment and vehicles and in terms of the gross budget?
Right. Yes, there are. So we have we're establishing a capital program. Previously, capital projects had been addressed on an ad hoc annual basis. And so, over the past year and a half, staff has begun the process of shifting from that to an actual, 5-year capital program where we can project costs and needs into the future, and, equipment for all departments, including police, and vehicles for all departments, including police, are included in that program.
So 25 to 30%, just comparative to when I was with the city of Atlanta. The city of Atlanta was on the order of 30, a little bit more than 30%. It's probably grown since then. And you see municipalities across the country where it's in excess of 50% in some locations. And so, I do think there's a legitimate conversation happening around the country around what level of resource goes to paramilitary activities, which is really what the police department is. What level of resource goes to those activities versus, maybe a police officer has probably not got the best training to deal with mentally ill homeless people. And George Chidi, I know, has plenty of opinions about this, so I'm waiting for him to jump in and take over for me any second now. But there's
I'm being polite.
There's a half a dozen activities that the police do that are arguably vastly better done by other agencies. George, I yield the floor to you, sir.
Yeah. Actually, my first question is related to a lot of this. Would you happen to know what percentage of your traffic stops and your citations are of African Americans?
I do not. We have never collected that data or parsed that through any research effort. However,
probably should.
I think that's one of the points of review that our board will consider undertaking. Personally, I think we need to look at everything soup to nuts. Get some outside perspectives from law enforcement experts to help us determine if our police department is operating in at a standard of excellence that our community can be proud of and trust moving forward.
I would encourage you to see more than just police experts, right? There are other
exactly
experts.
What I was about to say.
Yeah.
Is that police experts are going to
have a tendency to say you need more cops. Yeah.
The problem here is, and I say this out of experience because I was a city councilman for Pine Lake, and Pine Lake, before I was there, but to some degree while I was there, something we were working on was a speed trap. And something like 90% of the tickets we were giving out, we found out were being given out to Black people in a town that's about half, 50% white. There are places that are more abusive than Pine Lake. There are places that are more abusive than Avondale. Doraville, looking at you. But Avondale's got an issue in the sense that I know that their revenue for traffic citations is proportionately larger than a lot of other municipalities around here. And I suspect that the folks that they're tagging on College Avenue are more likely to be African American than the residents of Avondale Estates. Thing is, I'm guessing, like you want the data.
Right.
And your cops are going to go, I don't want to collect this data. I don't want to have to ask people what their race is when I'm pulling them over, like giving them a ticket, but that's how you figure this out. And yeah, you definitely need people who aren't cops, like folks who would represent those people who are getting traffic citations, to be part of the evaluation team, figuring out whether or not your police department is doing what it's supposed to do. Otherwise, Avondale does not overcome its own checkered historical reputation for redlining and for abuses in real estate, or how Avondale treated people of color who went to go use the lake for many, many, many years.
Well, in response to that, I think the board is very attuned to those concerns and wants to address them in a comprehensive manner, with an approach that involves, the appropriate experts and engagement throughout the community. This board has shown a willingness to tackle those difficult issues. Like you just spoke of, one of kind of the legacies of Avondale Estates was signage in our public spaces, limiting who could use those public spaces. And this board removed those signs from public spaces and made sure that Avondale Estates and its public areas, such as the lake or Willis Park, were inclusive and made available to all.
Yes, that's
What did
true.
those signs stay?
They were removed before my time, so I don't know the exact language.
Signs generally said this is for use by people who live here.
That's what I thought.
That was the general gist of it. I don't have the text in front of me, but it was basically, get off my lawn.
Yeah.
If your lawn was a large public space. So
I'm just checking.
So Patrick, something that happened before your time, and I want to preface this by saying I have no personal animus towards Lynn Thomas, personally or professionally. I've always found Lynn to be very responsive and very professional in his dealings with me. So I just want to put that out there. But Lynn Thomas was also involved in an incident where he shot and killed an unarmed person. And not long after that was resolved, the city made Lynn Thomas the police chief of the city of Avondale Estates. And I was shocked that they did that. I was even more shocked that nobody had anything to say about it. None of the usual, the Black Lives Matter activists didn't say anything about it. Maybe I wasn't calling the right activists, I don't know. But that happened, and I talked to and Patrick was not there. I think Clay Brown was the city manager at the time. But I called everyone, and I was like, are you sure this is what you want to do? Are you sure this is the message that you want to send? And it was a lot of, well, Lynn's just great, and we think he's a great person, and he may be a great person, but he also shot and killed somebody who was unarmed, and then the city turned around and made him the police chief. So, Patrick, I just wanted to put it back to you. Is this something the city has reconsidered, especially since you're having this discussion about equity within your police department and policing?
In my opinion, I don't believe it is appropriate to reconsider a personnel decision that was made previous to my administration. And if y'all allow me to elaborate why I feel that way. Kind of like you guys, when I came aboard at Avondale Estates, I was made aware of this incident. We were involved in a civil matter related to the incident, which has since been dismissed in the court system. So, given that knowledge and being empathetic to you know, not only the Black Lives Matter movement, but you know, challenges for changing the way we police, those types of things. I decided, I wanted to withhold judgment and look at the facts of the case myself, and so I did. And given the facts, and we can speak to those at greater length if y'all want to, I came to the conclusion that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation came to, that the former FBI agent that the city hired to conduct its own independent investigation, the district attorney of DeKalb County, and the federal civil appeals court and United States Supreme Court came to, which was, this was determined to be a justifiable action. My experience with Lynn Thomas since I have become city manager has been an incredibly positive one. He is an exemplary employee. He has been an exemplary employee. I have had no instances where I even considered taking disciplinary action. I think he's very mindful of the department's resources. I think he's very mindful of the organization's resources devoted to the department. He's very mindful of financial considerations. We have not had any formal excessive use of force complaints since he has become the police chief of Avondale Estates. He is well regarded by his own staff. And so, to me, I see no reason, given both the facts of the case and my experience with him as an employee of the city of Avondale Estates, to reconsider any past personnel decision that was made prior to my arrival. Nor do I think it's fair to. I didn't participate in that decision, and his product as police chief since I've been there has again been exemplary, and I have no reason not to fully support him with all of my confidence, and I'll continue to do so, and if he continues to be or act as to a standard level of policing that I have come to know from him.
George or Hans, do you want to jump in?
Fundamentally, policing requires successful policing. Let me just start with that. Successful policing requires a covenant that is somewhat based in trust between the police force and those that are policed. And I can't speak to the specifics in this particular instance. It may very well be the case that this gentleman was justified in the action that he took, and that the resulting findings are fully justified. But what you are seeing across this country right now is clear evidence of the fact that the covenant of that trust has been broken. And so to say that, unfortunately, because it may very well be that this man is appropriate in the role that he's in, and that all the actions that he took were appropriate, that is not trusted by the people that are policed now. And to say that the DA found it okay, and that internal investigations found it okay, and that the courts found it okay, and that the police review found it okay, and that entire system of power and accountability has been evidently, based on what we've seen, corrupted unfortunately by the police forces themselves, right? In many of these cases, the conversations about accountability, the conversations about transparency, access to information, modern, data-driven, reasonable reforms within police departments that could ground to a halt by the unions that won't countenance any changes. It's the absolute success that police departments have had in stifling modifications or changes has led to an environment where, unfortunately, even in the event when perhaps there's some justifiable use of force, it's not trusted by the public that is having to review that. And that is what we're seeing reflected across the country. My personal opinion here on a lot of this is that the only way to really drive substantive reform into these police departments is through some of the national action that we're seeing happen, where there is an enforcement from above. Because I don't think any mayor, any local municipality has enough credibility or political capital to be able to face down a recalcitrant police department seeking not to change. I think that the not change wins when you're having the conversation about modern policing standards at a local level. It can't happen.
Right. Well, I in response, I would just like to say, Hans, I agree with you. And I think as a staff and as a board, we've expressed openness to taking a look at everything. I don't think we are an organization that resists change. I'm always open to change, especially if the change is going to make the organization better and the trust of the community stronger. So those are the things that we are very much open to taking a look at. I think we're going to do so carefully. And if change is warranted, I don't think we will hesitate to implement it.
George Chidi, did you want to jump in on this?
Just a little bit. So while we're talking, I Googled Avondale Estates police racism, just because I want to know what other people are going to be thinking about it as they're looking at this. What was this event, this thing that happened with the two guys who were arrested at pinups and accused your police department of racial profiling?
So if you know that case, they were not arrested. There were two gentlemen who were driving a vehicle that was hit upon by a license plate reader. And the license plate reader came back as showing the car to be stolen. So our officers pulled the vehicle over and briefly detained the persons in that vehicle without arrest until they could determine whether that vehicle was indeed stolen. It turns out that there was a problem with the car was a rental car, and apparently the rental car agency had listed it as a stolen vehicle when it was not. So our officers stayed on the scene and waited until they could determine whether the vehicle was appropriately being operated by who it was supposed to be operated by. And then once that determination was made, the occupants were allowed to continue operating that vehicle. No claim was ever made. No legal claim was ever made by the occupants of that vehicle.
Okay. So the fact that there was no legal claim made by the occupants of the vehicle doesn't necessarily mean that they don't feel slighted. I mean,
and they may. I've never personally spoken with them, but all I can tell you are the facts as I know it. And
the reason I bring this up in part is because it gets to the heart of what a real conversation about policing is going to end up looking like. The car was stopped because there's a police officer on Avondale, on likely College Road, College Boulevard, College Avenue, who's sitting there running license plates just constantly. Like he's at the light, looking at every car that drives by, seeing whether or not somebody's got an expired plate or expired, something, or if the car is stolen or something like that. A lot of the discussion about reducing sort of police, problems essentially boils down to reducing the amount of routine contact that people have with the police. That those contacts, like the more contacts there are, the more likely it is that something like this is going to happen. And frankly, the way things work, the more likely it is that an African American is going to be on the receiving end of something that, if not unjust, certainly will feel like it. Avondale isn't alone. And I'm not picking on you on person, because I can pick literally any municipality in Georgia out and probably find a similar story. This one just happens to be about 2 years old. It's not the only one. You've got a hard job in front of you trying to figure out what to do now. I mean, I think you're acknowledging that the path forward is difficult, and that it's going to require challenging some long held assumptions about what good police work looks like. The question for me is whether or not there really is willingness. You're saying that institutionally, you are describing Avondale Estates as willing to change. And honestly, the evidence is questionable. This is a very traditional community by and large. So we'll see. It's something that we should watch, because if Avondale Estates can demonstrate a willingness to change, then other communities won't have any excuses.
Well, and don't underestimate the ability for the wrench to be thrown in the works of all the good intentions of everyone except for the police department in wanting to change, right? I mean, a mayor and a council member being accused of being soft on crime in Avondale Estates doesn't get reelected. And I don't care how well intentioned the individuals are. And it really actually doesn't even matter that it's evident in the data that changes actually reduce in lower crime. The steps taken that reduce resources to police departments end up losing elections. This is why I think it's a national conversation that we have to have and not a local one. And kudos to Avondale Estates for being willing to have the conversation. I'll be watching to see how successful you all are in it, because if you are successful, you're like the 0.0002% in the country that are actually successful in affecting some kind of change along these lines. So best of luck.
So let's jump to a reader question real quick. Vesma says Tucker doesn't have a police department. That is true. Tucker is policed by DeKalb County. So Tucker doesn't have a police department and have chosen to rely on DeKalb County. I wonder, in this defund the police world, if they would consider leveraging this as an opportunity instead to build social programs and services. Would it make a difference? George Welborn, what do you think?
Well, haven't spoken about this issue with any of the council or mayor, but I wouldn't expect that to get a lot of traction right now.
Yeah, you don't think that's going anywhere?
I'd be surprised.
Yeah, is that
again? I haven't had any discussion with any of the city leadership about that, so there could be things going on that I don't know about.
We should. I mean, do you think we should probably talk a little bit about what defund the police means? Because
yes.
it's very easily twisted into something that it isn't.
And George, we'll let George start, because George actually wrote a column about this, and he's definitely probably got it top of mind. So go for it.
Yeah. So don't get me wrong. There are people who say defund the police and mean abolish the police. They exist. Yeah. They're not a majority. They're not a significant minority. I think we're talking about 1 in 10 people who are talking about this. For the most part, what we're talking about is how the United States spends twice as much money on policing as it does on social services. That we, like here in DeKalb County, the jail spends about $3.7 million a year on mental health care. And the rest of the county spends about $2.1 million on mental health care, because that's where you go get mental health care if you are of the flavor of mentally ill, where you're doing things where you're acting out in public, you get arrested, you get thrown in jail instead of something better. There's a big question about traffic tickets and whether or not the funding mechanism and the tie between like writing a traffic ticket and getting a fee that goes back to whoever writes the traffic ticket or that agency, whether or not that needs to be broken. Civil asset forfeiture, like the fact that police can seize a vehicle or seize cash in the process of an arrest. And even if you are exonerated, you still have to pay money to fight for your property in civil court, and you might still lose it. Like that, like a lot of people want to disconnect that incentive so that policing changes around, so that police are not policing on the basis of what's going to make them the most money. Whether or not police officers should pay a financial penalty if they are found to have a personal financial penalty, not an institutional one, like a loss of pension, for example, if they engage in misconduct, like where the financial incentive to engage in misconduct is broken and that there are significant financial penalties to pay that could be painful and personal if they don't. That's to fund the police.
I mean, we should point out the fact that we can't even get public access to records of bad cops performing these actions. Like every other municipal worker is publicly visible, but the officers who are the ones authorized to use the force are not. And that's just indicative of that. You know, when you talk about defunding the police, you're talking about trying to break that stranglehold on poor behaviors that are protected under the rubric of the current system. This is not a Avondale Estates or a Decatur or even a Georgia conversation. I mean, this is a national problem in municipal policing.
Let's jump to a reader question. Question for all of the panelists: does a police department reflect a community? And I'll start with Patrick Bryant.
I think it should. You know, the relationship between the community and the police has to be strong, and there has to be this level of trust there, so that the community, you know, feels safe. I think that's kind of the number one tenet of government responsibility, is to provide a safe place for its residents to live, work, and play. So that being said, I think it's incredibly important that, you know, your municipal police services reflect the wants and the needs of the community and the spirit of the community. In Avondale Estates, you know, I think we try our best to integrate the community into our police services. We have a citizens patrol and a citizens police academy that our residents can attend to get a better feel for what police work in Avondale Estates means, what it looks like, what are its roles and responsibilities, so on and so forth. So, you know, I'm not saying that that's the end all be all of developing that strong bond between community and police department. As I said earlier, I think, you know, from an organizational perspective, and this goes organization wide from the board down through the staff, that we're always open to improving that relationship and to improving the way we provide services, and are going to kind of move forward with the tack that, you know, that's our number one goal, and we hope to achieve it.
George Welborn, what about you? Do you think a police department reflects a community?
Oh yeah, I sure wish it ought to. To my mind, ideally, the police department would be made of people that live in the community. They should live in the jurisdiction that they work for. And I would like for the police to reflect the community, but, you know, I don't know that they always do.
George Cheedy has a cat, and I feel like that's the real news here. George.
Didn't mean for the cat to steal your thunder there. I apologize.
Well, we
Um,
definitely, yeah, go for it. Should the police reflect the police department? Does a police department reflect a community?
It should. It's the same answer everybody else has got. It should reflect the community. Um, the but the whole community, like everybody, including like the majority of the minority, the rich and the poor, and usually it doesn't. And honestly, so a lot of that is just the nature of who wants to do what job, But yeah, it better. Like the short answer is it needs to, or we're still going to be screwed and having the same argument in 10 years.
Hans,
Can
what do
I-
you think?
I don't think the police department should reflect the community. I think the police department needs to be better than the community is the ask that we're making of them. They are carrying guns and authorized to use force against us. They have to be better than the community. It is a part of the contract. You cannot just reflect the community. You guys have no idea how many racist 911 calls go into a call center, right? Like you have no idea. And the cops have to respond to that. They have to be better than the community that they police because so many of the communities, let me be honest, so many of the communities still kind of suck at this, right? So no, they don't reflect the community. They have to be better than. They have to be better than. And like that's the standard. It's not equivalent to, it's better than. I agree with everything that everyone else has said in context, right? They should, like, it needs to be proportionately, like, you better not have an all-white police department policing a majority black city like Ferguson, right? You can't have that. That's not okay. But and the cops absolutely should live in the communities that they're policing. They should have to live with the consequences of the actions that they take in those communities. And by and large, I don't think you're going to find a ton of cops that disagree with that, right? But at the end of the day, the standard that we hold the cops to is higher than the standard we hold the community to. It has to be.
So, George Welburn, I saw you raise your hand. Were you trying to get in, or were you just stretching?
No, actually, they got dinner guests coming at 7, and a couple of them were at the door. So I was like, "Hey, come on in."
If you ever change your mind, all you got to do is yell. That's how you get on the Zoom stream.
No, he was doing great. He didn't need any more input from me.
So I will share that I have talked to our awesome intern, Alex Brown. She's still with us for another month, thank God, because we need her help. So we published a story on Decatur-ish this week about people opening up this conversation in Decatur. And Decatur's police department budget has grown by $1 million in the last few years. And I am assuming, I don't have the budget numbers in front of me, I am assuming a lot of that is personnel, because whenever you go to a police department and you say, what do you need? They're 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, we need more people. We need more people to get to more places. And I'm sure that is generally what's behind the growth in Decatur. But we're breaking it down because I asked her to please pull out the department budget and let's look at, we're talking about redistributing resources. So let's say we take that $1 million that was put into the police department's budget over the last 4 or 5 years and redirected that. What does it look like? First of all, what does it look like? What does their budget look like as far as, what's being spent on cops, what's being spent on tactical gear, what's being spent on pensions, what's being spent on police cars, and how would that transfer over to a social services setting? What could a social services department do that a police department couldn't do with the $1 million? I also asked Alex to look at how many of these calls are actually just EMS calls. How many times does the police department respond to something and it's basically a fire department call. Somebody's having a heart attack, somebody's having a psychotic episode or whatever. And I pointed out that a few years ago, I think last year, the city of Decatur actually tried to come up with an organic solution to to the amount of homeless people that are in the square. There's been an increase of that in recent years, and the city of Decatur talked about doing an ambassador type program where it wouldn't be policing. It would be a person that would go out and talk to that person and connect with social services. But that didn't go anywhere, and I think in part it had to do with objections that these people weren't peace officers. They weren't able to be the intake for some of this. So I think it's interesting that even in the past when we've tried to do something like this, it's inevitably gotten pushback from the police, even though police, generally speaking, I think, don't want to be the homeless police. You know, they don't want to deal. George, I see you're shaking your head. What do you have to say about that?
Just that, like the cops, like if the only thing they hate more than having to respond to a homelessness or a mental illness issue is a domestic violence thing. Like it's because it's no win for whoever shows up at the door. They're not there. So the training has improved, but they're still cops. They can't involuntarily commit somebody who absolutely needs it. They don't have housing in their pocket. So all they can do is refer somebody to a homeless shelter that may or may not be taking people in that night. They have no drug treatment programs that they can personally make a phone call and get somebody into. There is a mental health hotline that police officers have, and the hotline can prioritize a police officer's call. But if there are no actual resources on the back end, then that cop's just sort of sitting there twiddling his or her thumbs and pushing around homeless people who annoy other people. And it's you want to deep six a cop's morale and say, yeah, I don't want to do this. I'm going to go be a baker. Like that's tell somebody to do that once a week, every week for 3 years, and then see what your retention looks like.
On the exact same people, right? It's not like it's new faces. It's the same group of people. And I mean, that's an example of where we're deploying resources incorrectly. We're not, and on this particular point, I am deeply sympathetic to the cops. We're not giving them the tools. We're not giving them the resources. We're not giving them the training. We're not giving them the support, but we're giving them all of the responsibility to fix it. And then all of the liability for not getting it right when they don't fix it. So it's actually difficult for me to think of a worst case scenario than precisely what it is that we do currently dealing with sending police officers on mental illness calls.
So we got a question from a reader. How are cities working to answer the problem or the question about why some of our public servants, like teachers and police officers and firefighters, can't actually afford to live in the communities that they serve? Does anybody want to tackle that?
I think those are great questions, and those are things that need to be discussed. It's a very real issue. The amount of compensation we provide to our police officers does not necessarily afford them, a residence within our city limits. We base that compensation on, compensation packages that other communities are offering for the services that we are providing, so that we remain competitive. And we, as you know, Dan, we just went through a process whereby we had a third party, build a new classification and compensation plan for the city of Avondale Estates. But yeah, I think Hans was onto something earlier about, I think it would go a long way if your police officers were residents of the community in which they police. And I agree with him. I think that helps build a level of morale within the department and increase the level of trust within the community. However, there is very much an issue at play as to whether the employees of the organization are able to live in the community that they work for, given the levels of compensation that not only municipal governments provide, but state governments, federal governments, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I think those conversations need to be held, and we'll see if they are.
I mean, this is the economics on this is pretty clear. Like set aside policy, set aside anything else. If you want to have a low density single family home community, your cops aren't going to live in it. If you want affordability, you want density. There's no middle ground there. If you want a community to be affordable, you have to be able to support the density in that community to get that affordability in. Now, I'll take some exception to Decatur, because I think in some cases we end up in the worst of all worlds, where we build density but then make it super, super expensive density, which doesn't help anyone, right? Like you have to build density with the intent of having some of that be affordable. But if you don't have enough homes in a community, the cops can't afford to live there. The teachers can't afford to live there. The firefighters can't afford to live there. What is the availability of housing in the community? And if it's insufficient, it gets expensive, and you end up in a situation where the folks that serve the community can't live in the community. So what I would love to see is all the people that are out there that are saying, hey, I want the cops, and I want the teachers, and I want the firefighters, and I want the civil servants. I want all these people to be able to live in my community. It's not synonymous with, that is precisely the same thing as saying you want higher density.
So
that's just math.
Let's jump to a comment. Trey Bliss, who's a friend of mine and one of the smartest people that I know, jumped in, and he said, here's the stat that blew my mind. There are 2 levels of barber licensure in Georgia. To become a barber 2 in Georgia, you need to complete a program of at least 1,140 training hours and pass a licensing exam. To become a master barber, you need to go through a 1,500-hour training program or 3,000 hours of apprentice work. To be a cop, it takes 11 weeks to complete and consists of 408 hours of rigorous training that includes classroom-based lecture and practical skills building sessions. So if I read this comment correctly, I think he's saying that you actually have to put in more training and apprentice work to become a barber than a police officer in Georgia. Is that true? I've never heard that.
I know, but you don't want a bad haircut, do you?
No, I don't. I need one.
I mean, my reaction to those numbers are, why the hell do we have such a high level of standard on barbers? That seems so unreasonable.
I understand that entirely. Like, it's not. It has nothing to do with whether or not you can cut hair. And believe it or not, I actually know something about barbers. It's a surprise. It's because the barbers themselves wanted to limit the amount of competition that they had. So they raised this ridiculous standard to make sure that Joe guy who knows how to cut heads doesn't start up a shop next door. That's it. It's old school guild work. That's all. Yeah. But there's no barrier to entry for police work, because it's a government agency, and we don't want to put barriers up for people to become cops. We want all the cops we could get. It's what can we get away with, as opposed to how much can we stuff other people down. It's why it's what it is.
I don't want to get off.
11 weeks of police training is 3 weeks longer than my Army training, right? Basic is 8 weeks, right? So it's you actually can pack a fair bit in there. And it's a little bit misstated in the sense that there is an enormous amount of on-the-job apprenticeship training. At the end of the day, being a police officer, there is a large amount of apprenticeship associated with it, and that is appropriate. That's not wrong. You actually want them trained on the street by skilled officers. It obviously greatly backfires in the case where you have an idiot like Derek Chauvin or whatever his name is in Minneapolis with George Floyd. That's very clearly not who you want training new officers on the street. But in general, it is appropriate to get recruits on the street apprenticed under skilled officers.
So I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent here, but has anyone been able to, in this room, actually been able to get a haircut since the pandemic started? I have not. I've got college hair. I don't know if Hans, like, if that was a home thing or if you.
Well, you can't tell by looking at it.
Yeah,
This is a beard trimmer that was being
Okay.
put to poor use.
I didn't want to assume what was going on. George, I don't know what your situation is. Patrick,
I had
George,
a-
It looks like he's got it sorted.
I had a haircut last week. It was the first time in 3 months.
How did that go? So how did that work? Because I'm curious now.
Well, I went to a local Tucker salon, and
You want to say the name of the salon? Give them a free shout out. They probably would appreciate it.
sure, Steve Harvey Salon,
Steve
right
Harvey
there
Salon.
on the Vista Road, right in downtown Tucker.
Okay.
And I had like a 4:00 appointment. You stay outside until it's your time to come in. And the woman that cut my hair had someone in her chair, but then, she was wearing a mask and I was wearing a mask, and, as much as could. She kind of cut around it and have extra things that they do to clean and disinfect. She was talking about how much more often they change the barbicide and all that kind of stuff. So they're taking steps to make it, more hygienic and safer.
So you felt safe.
It's probably, I figured if I could go to a city council meeting, I could get a haircut. That's kind of where I came with it.
Well, Hans Utz recently shared his experience where he got a COVID test, found out he was an asymptomatic carrier, tested positive. So, Hans, where does that stand? I know the last show you said you were waiting on another test to confirm that you no longer had it.
Yeah, so the full arc was DeKalb was advertising and advising folks to get tested. We have tests as long as you're citizens in DeKalb. And I thought, okay, sure, I'll do that. That's my duty. I'll go ahead and get tested. No symptoms. And it wasn't like I thought I would come back positive, but I did. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. And you get the test, and then so like immediately I get the test, and I'm like, maybe I do, but so I'm asymptomatic for about a week. But they say to pay attention between day 8 and day 12, and sure enough, on day 10, I ended up developing a real cough. Now in the serious cases, people crack ribs and chip teeth, and I didn't have anything like that. And no other symptoms, but I had a day where I had, like a cold, a cough, and that cleared up. So I'm super lucky. 72 hours after my last symptoms, I went and got tested. That test came back negative. I waited for 24 hours, then went back and got tested. That test also came back negative. That came back today negative. So I am officially out of quarantine and able to participate in the real world, including raising my own children. So my wife is very thankful for that.
That's the best news
so
of all, I bet.
Yeah, I'm clear of it. I'm so unbelievably lucky that my experience of it was what it was. And I certainly encourage everyone in DeKalb to make use of the incredible resources that the Department of Health has put forward to testing everyone. It's surprisingly well run, like incredibly. You sign up online, you get a slot, you show up, they do it. 24 hours later, you get the results. It's actually, I'm pretty proud of what they've been able to pull off.
And DeKalb County Board of Health sponsored Decatur's, so thank you to that. Patrick Bryant is going to have to drop the call in a minute, so I wanted to thank him for coming on the show and find out if you wanted to leave us with any parting thoughts on your way out the door.
No, I just really appreciate the opportunity to engage with you guys in this discussion, and I think it's incredibly worthwhile, and hope it continues to be fruitful as we move forward. And I guess anytime you'd like to have me back, I'm more than happy to come.
Well, we would love to have you back. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Well, you're most welcome.
Enjoy your evening.
All right, bye-bye.
So, back on Ann MCN said, I had a positive too after Monday test, no symptoms yet. and she went and got the test on the advice of our show. So we're glad that we were able to educate people. I actually went and had the test done as well. My test was negative. It was free. You got, again, full disclosure, Department of Public Health is sponsoring us, but you go to the Google DeKalb County Board of Public Health. You can schedule a test. The test is free. They'll give you a QR code. You go, you scan the code, they do the test. The test sucks, but you get your results.
It does kind of suck.
George, have you had a COVID test done? Because I know you were out.
So I'm going sometime in the next day or two.
Okay.
I wanted to give it a week.
Sure.
Just to see if symptoms developed or whatnot. I've been in isolation the whole time.
Yep.
I've been trying very hard not to go anywhere or see anyone, with the exception of 2 days ago. So if everybody at Fox 5 dies, it's my fault. So I have a show.
Yeah,
I
talk
can't
about it.
believe this.
You got a show coming out.
They gave me a show.
I would have given you a show. I did give you a show.
You did.
This is the
So
show.
I've given him a show.
That's right.
So, for half an hour, Sunday at 8:00 in the morning, I will be talking with various and sundry people about what happens next, like in terms of police reform, in terms of taking the lessons of the day from the street, from the protests, and turning them into actual policy. So I had Abel Mabel Thomas and the head of the police civilian review board, and an attorney who works on civil rights issues, talking about defund the police and other things. Just better for you to see it. I don't want to spoil it.
Wouldn't miss it. I will probably catch the tape though because I try to sleep in on Sundays.
Yeah, you and everyone else.
Sunday morning at 8 a.m.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
I will definitely watch the replay of it. One of
My hundreds of fans will be there.
You've
I'm
got
sure.
more than hundreds of fans, but most of your fans are like me. They don't get up on Sunday if they don't have to. So I just wanted to point out too, we have not called some of the local races yet. I know a lot of media have done that. I have not, because Bauke Vu, who's on the local elections board, and he was actually on our show on Wednesday. He and I were texting back and forth. And he says there are still 75,000 absentee ballots outstanding in DeKalb County, which is more than enough to change the result of an individual election, that they're still going to have to go through the signature verification process. As I understand it, there has to be some general agreement that the signature matches, which I signed my signature to credit card receipts in grocery stores all the time. I don't know how the hell that would ever hold up in a court of law. So I'm really interested to see how this signature process plays out. George, what are you hearing in terms of the election? Anything?
Just that, and I check every 4 hours at the elections board to see whether or not they're new results. Nothing. What you've got published is what they've got. It looks like Kim Jackson may have just squeaked by like 30 votes to winning without a runoff.
And that race
And
is
Senate 41.
Okay.
That's Tucker's Senate seat.
oh, okay.
That's my district.
Yeah. Yeah, Kim Jackson, like by a nose, maybe. It looks like Michelle Henson is going to a runoff.
Oh wow.
Like unless something like crazy happens in the absentees, but she's got like 40%. Somebody else has got 30, so she's probably in a runoff.
What is
she do?
75,000? What is 75,000 like in terms of the percent of total votes cast? What is that 75,000?
About 35%.
Yeah.
So yeah, like a 30 vote number that like that's going to be
May or may not hold up.
yeah, like that's uncallable at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. What the hell did Michelle Henson do to make people mad? I've always thought that.
She aged.
Really?
Literally, that's it. Well, all right. It's not even that. She's still glorious. I wanted people to vote for her. She's a friend. She's been my rep at one point. She's amazing. Her district has changed a little bit underneath her. It's grown a little browner and a little poorer. But she is about the best representative they could have right now. I'm sorry, I'm plugging for her. But and it's to say nothing against the folks who are running against her. It's just we're about to try to figure out how to cut the budget by 10 to 14%. And she's been through 3 of these already. And you want somebody who knows where to plant the knife in somebody's back under these circumstances. I mean, you need somebody who knows how to bushwhack someone in order to protect a district. And if you're new, you're not gonna. You're somebody's lunch for the first 2 years. And I think it's a bad risk. But she's white and her district's mostly not. And honest to God, I think somebody thought that was enough.
Well, I'm shocked at that result. I really am because Michelle's been doing this a long time. I was shocked she had an opponent in the first place because most of our reps did not have a primary opponent. In general, Elena Parent did not. Mary Margaret Oliver did not. So Carla.
Here's the
Drenner
race
did
to
not.
watch for, by the way. Pam Stevenson drew 2 challengers because Pam Stevenson was weakened in multiple ways. She had some legal issues. And she was a strong proponent of the ethics legislation that went nowhere because it was nonsense. But one of her opponents is Stan Watson. And she's within a few percentage points of a runoff against Stan Watson. Stan Watson was in my personal opinion, it's more than my opinion. He was indicted, he was convicted of a crime. So I think he was corrupt.
Other people have had the same opinion, obviously.
Yeah. He misused his office. He was named he was a potential witness in an FBI investigation into some serious stuff in South Carolina. There's all sorts of nonsense floating around him. He resigned. He tried to run for tax commissioner, got smoked, and he's just looking for another way to get back in. And he found a vulnerable seat and took a shot. And he's within a few hundred votes of taking Pam to a runoff. And while I'm not a fan of Pam right now, I will be knocking on doors in South DeKalb to keep her seat if Stan Watson is the alternative.
So answer this question because I can't figure this out. It's my understanding that Vernon Jones wasn't even supposed to be on the ballot, and yet he was. And there were people. What the hell happened? I thought he was not supposed to be on the ballot.
Early votes.
That guy.
Early votes.
Early votes.
People voted early, and then before he pulled out.
Huh.
Hey guys, this has been a lot of fun, but I got to go too.
Yeah, George, no problem. Take it easy. Thank you for joining us. We wish you luck with your efforts over there, and we'll keep covering it. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, keep your eyes on Tucker and TuckerOpenDoor.com, and thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you, George. We appreciate you.
You bet. Bye-bye.
George Welburn with Tucker Open Door dropping the call. We are still chatting because all we do is chat on the show. We just like to hear ourselves talk. But that's okay. We are actually, so if you're just tuning in, this is the Decatur-ish.com Twitch show. We are, I believe, 5 minutes away from getting affiliate status. We have to stream a certain number of hours in any given period to get that, and then we can do all sorts of cool things like get support for the show. So we're kind of shooting the breeze a little bit. They won't always run this long, but since we got 3 people that like to talk, I figure why the hell not?
Can I throw a topic out?
Yes, go for it.
You gave us your opinion at the very beginning, but I definitely want to grab the bone of my teeth around the monument. I don't even want to call it a monument, but the traitor's phallus that's sticking up into Cap Square. Just like a side note, it's obviously probably not going to get run now, Dan, but I did put an editorial forward about it.
It had too many dick jokes. That was the thing.
Oh, I pulled them out. All you need is different adjectives.
I know you pulled the dick jokes out, but I was like, there are a lot of dick jokes in this house.
Here's the thing. So first of all, the city deserves a ton of props for taking the steps to creatively find a legitimately legal argument for taking the damn thing down, right? I think what a lot of people don't understand, and this is what I dealt with a little bit in the column, is that the state wrote a law that puts incarceration on the table for public servants that take action on this thing. Like that's different than other states. Georgia basically said, if you're a legislator or you're a mayor and you try to take one of these racist agitprops down, we're going to slap you in jail. And so that's a difficult it's difficult for us to demand our elected officials actually risk jail time on our behalf. But total kudos to the city for exploring their legal options and coming up with a good legal option. I had a different one in my column. I thought, because the law very clearly stipulates that you're allowed to take them down or move them to do repairs, like infrastructure repairs. I mean, the square needs repair. The courthouse needs repair. And if it takes 100 years to do that repair, well, I mean, municipalities are bureaucratically inept at times. But there are mechanisms to take the damn thing down. I'm glad to see that the city had the courage and the cojones to take the steps that they've taken. And I think there's another half a dozen approaches that can be taken after that if the court challenge doesn't go our way.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the key thing here is that the county had the opportunity to remove it, but nobody wanted it. The cemetery didn't want it. There was no museum that wanted it. Nobody wanted this thing. So if nobody else wants it and we don't want it,
it's not a great monument. I mean, honestly.
Yeah, it's not.
It's a traitor phallus. It's ridiculous.
It's not even distinguished. I mean, so I have argued that Stone Mountain should be preserved, in part because it is the largest single expression of that specific form of art that exists in the world. It's irreplaceable in that regard. It sucks. They went big, so go big or go home. Like there's literally nothing else like it in the world. Fine, but that obelisk, you could make one in a week. In a day if you felt like it.
With grammatically incorrect, cheesy language at its base. What is that?
Yeah. It doesn't have artistic merit. It's really not a historical thing. It's not that great. It exists there so that in 19 whatever, white racists knew they could lynch people there without getting hurt. That's what it was for. Yeah. Kudos to Judge Seeliger on the way out the door.
Yeah. Also, yep.
Because and I gotta wonder if he's this is like Judge Dredd, and if you saw the Judge Dredd movie, a retiring judge can overturn a law on his way out the door. He gets one before he has to go walk into the desert with a book of laws and die. This is like Judge Dredd. So Judge Seeliger goes, yeah, this thing, it's a nuisance. I think it's a nuisance. Go ahead. It's a nuisance. I'm leaving. Bye. Yeah. What are you going to do?
Here's what I'm going to strongly suggest to the county, because I do broadly think that the county also wants the damn thing down. I don't think there's a bunch of people there that are thinking, oh, no.
One does. You need to know this. I had this conversation with Lorraine Cochran Johnson 2 days ago, and she's in favor of keeping it. Okay. She said it straight up. I think this is history. I'm in favor of keeping it. And I'm looking at her okay, weird public.
So, besides her, the rest of the rational people.
I thought you were going to say Nancy Jester. Lorraine Cochran.
I have no idea what Nancy Jester thinks about this.
Well, she voted against removing it. I mean, that's
okay. Well, then we know she's
yeah.
Take it down very, very quickly, tomorrow. Get it into some box that you can hold it in, and then fight it out for the next 30 years so people forget about it.
I want to put it in the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it's it's being investigated by top men.
I
Top men.
want. I think. I think it represents a great source of granite for mixing into asphalt for use on paving the next sewer channel that needs to be fixed. Like that's my take on it. But I mean, sure.
Or
Oh my
Vespa
God.
says we could store it in a vat of acid, which is fine. You know.
Good, actually.
So what are the odds that this actually gets taken down? Because I mean, you know, before this ruling even happened, I intercepted a letter that the county had gotten before Decatur even filed its complaint, and it basically, you know, it was an attorney who represented the sons of Confederate veterans, and in the letter he calls the Civil War the War for Southern Independence. I'm like, well, we know which direction this is going. And basically said, yeah, if you try to remove this thing, we're going to sue you. So they already fired a shot across the bow before this happened. So what are the odds you think that the county actually does this and removes it?
1 in 6.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing.
Really?
You're going to get there's going to be a lawsuit filed about it. It's going to get challenged. No question. Right? Whether you win or lose that challenge, I have no idea. But you have just been given a free pass to take the thing down.
Yeah.
Get out there with the crane tomorrow and take the damn thing down. And then let's let this fight out for the next however many years it takes to fight it out.
The
Right?
question is whether or not there are some other politics going on between the state and the county that would necessitate the county not pissing off the state legislature while it's still in session.
Holds true even at a city level, right? I mean, that's the kind of crap that is always happening behind the scenes. And I think the real question is, how much does it actually piss the state off? How much of it is a bunch of noisy posturing by a minority of people that you don't want to piss them off because they're loud as hell, but they don't actually lever an enormous amount of power, versus is it really a threat? Like, is the state really gonna cut funding over a racist monument? Do they really want that battle? Right. And so, yeah, I mean, totally correct. Hard to call the odds on that. If I were the CEO of DeKalb County,
Yeah.
that crane would be out there tomorrow, and I'd be like, what? Like a judge's order. But hey, you know,
What are the
I'm surprised that there hasn't been a stay, like that there wasn't somebody arguing on the other side who's looked for an emergency injunction to prevent it from happening.
Because they were quiet about it. That's why. The way they did this did not require the city commission to go public about it. That was why they did it the way they did it. Because under the nuisance law, a city attorney can do that without specific direction from the city commission. So I asked about that. I was like, how did I not hear about this? And it was because they didn't want me to hear about it. And Brian just sort of did it, and then the ruling came down, and that's how we found out about it when the judge issued their ruling.
Yeah, stop it.
Hey, leave Sarah alone.
hi there.
Hey, Sarah. Well, listen, everybody. This has been a great show. I think we did it. I think we streamed enough to stream some more, so that's good. If you are just jumping in, we're getting to the end of our Twitch show here. We broadcast every Wednesday and Friday at 6 p.m. Usually, 99% of the time, our guests have been George Chidi and Hans Utz. I hope they will continue to join us for future episodes. I have a lot of fun. I hope they have fun. I'm going to try to pick up some additional guests. If you have a guest recommendation, shoot that to me at editor@decatorish.com. I am talking with the chair of the county GOP. He wants to join in, which I think would be fun. I think we could get
Beyonce, if there's any chance.
we'll call her people. We'll see. We'll see what they have to say. But thank you all for tuning in. And if you haven't already, go ahead and give us a follow. And we hope you all. What are you guys doing this weekend? Really quick, got plans besides quarantine?
Celebrating being out of quarantine.
You're going to celebrate being out of quarantine. George,
Yes.
I think, is going to be in quarantine.
Giving you support, George.
I appreciate it.
Hang in there.
I'm
Thank you.
gonna play some Dungeons and Dragons on Saturday and water my tomato plants. So I've got a busy weekend ahead. Just
Not necessarily in that order.
action packed. So anyway, thank you to everyone who tuned in. We had a really good response today. If you haven't already, please give us a follow. And if you want to jump back in to our stream, we're going to be back here this coming Wednesday at 6. Stop being weird, George. We're gonna come back here this Wednesday at 6 o'clock. We hope you will join us. Thank you for watching the Decatorish.com Twitch show, and we'll talk to you next week. George and Hans, thank you so much.
See you, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye, George.